Welcome, everybody. Welcome, good evening.
Come on in.
Take your seats, grab your wine, grab your beer. Let's get the fireplace going. Did you guys get my copy of Peter's Laws I sent out? All right, so that's the 2013 updated version with a high-resolution version of me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a pleasure to bring back a very brilliant and great friend, Philip Rosedale. So Philip has been at SU a number of times over the last few years. We have our event where we call our Innovation Partners Program. We bring in the top CEO, C-suite executives from 30 Fortune 500 companies. And these are, people running multi-tens to $100 billion companies. And Philip got voted the top speaker at the last event. You know that?
No.
You did? All right, we got our fireplace going for the fireside chat. So, by the way, I've been in touch with your assistant. We want to get you back for IPP in September.
I'm good.
So, okay, cool. So, a little bit of background about Philip. He has a bachelor's in physics from the University of California at UCSD, San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Wikipedia says.
And then this one's true.
And had his first real job at Real Networks. Had a vision since his childhood about creating virtual worlds that you could go and manipulate. And while he was at Real Networks, from the last time I interviewed you, I remember this, you sort of said, it's time.
Yeah.
The technology is finally there. And he went and created Linden Labs that created Second Life. And if you don't, everybody here knows Second Life. Who's actually played in Second Life? Can you raise your hand? So
it's a friendly crowd.
It's a friendly crowd.
Makes me happy.
And from Second Life, retired from there and has created a number of other companies, including, I love the name of the other company, Coffee and Power, because he said, to be an entrepreneur, what do you really need? You need coffee and you need power, and I completely agree. But since the last time he spoke, I think what is really not public information yet, and why I'm really excited to have him here to speak to you, is that Philip is created his next company. It's a company called High Fidelity, and it is the follow-on to Second Life. So if you imagine the company that is going to take all the lessons, learnings, and actually create a virtual world for large-scale business opportunities, that's what High Fidelity is a vision for. And so, Philip, welcome back.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks for having me. It's so fun to be here.
We have an amazing group, actually one of the strongest classes I think we've ever had. So that's my feedback to you guys so far. I might change that in 3 weeks when you have your team project presentations. But for now, I'm reasonably impressed.
It does seem great.
Yeah, it'll be even better. You may be unbeatable in 3 weeks. So let's jump in. And if you could tell briefly, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's important to know the origin story of Second Life. It's your vision, its creation, its early startup, because a lot of these guys, all of these are entrepreneurs starting companies here that want to touch the lives of millions and billions of people. So,
well, I think the one that I think the simplest way to bring it all together for me, when I was a kid, I was taking things apart and building things, and like so many kids doing that, I was scientific. I was really into science as a kid, and so naturally I want to be an astronaut. Someday I'll be an astronaut. I'll start with working on cars, and then I'll build cardboard rocket ships, and then I'll build real rocket ships. And like so many of us, right? Like all of us, I had that dream of let's go out into space. Actually, like Peter, I've heard who had even more passion and just was absolutely unstoppable in it. But I had this idea, the great beyond, the great mysteries are out in space naturally. And at about the same time, computers sort of became accessible, and I started programming computers because I was into science and stuff, and so naturally I'd start programming computers. But as luck had it, I got into sort of all of these parts of using computers. I guess what interested me the most about computers wasn't spreadsheets or business applications or doing math. It was like simulating things. It was like automata, the game of life. How could you do physics? How could you make molecules work in computers? This is what fascinated me. And so a lot of the early stuff I did on computers was stuff like that. And so I got this feeling in my head, I think, from a very young age that if you're really just looking for a great undiscovered country, there is outer space, but outer space, takes a lot of joules. Yeah, it takes a lot of energy to get there, and it's hard, and we don't know exactly how we're going to do it yet. And companies like your new one are trying to figure it out. And so we don't know. And what I was struck by was, hey, wait a minute. If we can simulate the laws of physics sort of inside of computers, why can't we just go into inner space? Why can't we create sort of more virtual atoms inside the computer than there are sort of Lego blocks to build with here on Earth? And if we do the right stuff, and if we make that work the right way, and if we can connect enough computers together, maybe we can create a kind of a space that we can collectively explore and colonize and build in that's even better, that's even more amazing. So I think that was like the kid part of the genesis of that. And that was what, like Peter said, when I was in high school and college, I was just always like, man, oh man, we've got to use computers this way. And then when the internet showed up, I was just floored by the possibility that you could suddenly connect all of Earth's computers, which at that point were not connected to each other, together by IP networking, by this one simple protocol. And so then I was like, okay, now this could actually be done. And Peter was saying my first real job was Real Networks. I had a little entrepreneurial computer software company, and at the time, in 1995, I moved to Silicon Valley. I moved to San Francisco, actually, and I just fell in love with this. I found out about the internet, and I was like, oh my God, we're going to be able to do so much stuff. But I still knew at that point that it wasn't ready yet. The delay and the bandwidth and the 3D capabilities of computers were not good enough to go and make those planets, to go and make that world. And so I waited, worked at Real Networks, and then when computers got fast enough, and when broadband happened, and when real 3D rendering happened, which was about 99, I jumped ship and started Second Life.
So you've got the vision for a virtual world. A lot of people tried and failed.
Yeah.
You succeeded. Just to put a number on it so people know, the economy of Second Life today is how big?
The economy today, which is about as big as it was when it was at its largest, that is, it's been about the same for about the last 5 years, is about $600 million US in transactions between people. So not with the company. Transactions between people, buying and selling things from each other, building things, putting on events. It's
so
about
if it's a country, it's got a $600 million, almost, two-thirds of $1 billion economy, which is extraordinary.
GDP, exactly.
GDP. And how many users?
About 1 million.
About 1 million users.
About 100,000 people online at once, and about 1 million people using it every month. And the interesting thing relative to Second Life is, everybody knows, Second Life got really famous in about 2006. It actually went up to about that number of people, and it stayed at about that number of people. The media, of course, went away, so everybody, and there's lots of appropriate, backlash of, where's my jetpack, where's my total virtual world, which I think is fair. But the actual usage of it has stayed about the same, but not grown.
So let's talk about usage of Second Life, and then we'll talk more about where you're going next. But what are the sort of the most interesting uses? What do people do in Second Life? What are the uses of it?
I can remember standing there in the very beginning and watching as the first dozens of people came in. Literally, we hired this woman, Shar, who was literally almost citizen zero in Second Life, and so it was so interesting to stand there and watch the first 20 or 30 people and watch what they did. we just made this kind of hilly country, and we made this little kind of folksy city that was in the middle of it. Nobody remembers this anymore. This is in the alpha of Second Life. For the many people, I'm so glad people here use Second Life. This was kind of on a grid that didn't exist, that went away before the sort of Second Life that we know today. But I watched those people come in, and what they did at the very beginning was they just made stuff. I mean, what was so cool was that you could make things, and really there were a few big industries that emerged out of that. One was making things that sort of sit in the world, like buildings and art and furniture, and all of the stuff that trees, all the things we associate with the world around us. And then there was this idea, and I remember this very well, the first time somebody was like, hey, wait a minute, can I like attach this to my head? And they put it on their avatar, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's crazy." And then we made it so that you could build things, with these 3D Lego blocks, basically, and programmable Lego blocks, and then you could put these things and attach them to your body. And so then the whole industry of jewelry and clothing and fashion and just crazy stuff, things that followed you and pets and stuff, was all born of that kind of attaching it to yourself. I always think that whole idea of like the world out there and then the world that is my body and myself and my art, my expression and meaning, as being these sort of two separate kind of creative areas. But basically, a lot of the early stuff, and still what people do today, is make things, sell them to each other, recreate the world as we know it, create fantastic sort of experiments and explorations into different worlds, meet each other, fall in love, get married, have sex. I mean, everything that we do in the real world.
So you've got the currency is Linden dollar.
Yep.
And you can actually buy with currencies around the world. You can convert them to Linden dollars.
Yep. In the very beginning, you couldn't, and which was fascinating to watch that economic transition. And now you can easily exchange Linden dollars for euros or dollars or whatever you like.
So there are a number of people who actually earn a living on Second Life. Can you talk a little about what the economics there are?
Yeah, there's probably, I would say there's probably in the low thousands of people who would characterize their interaction with Second Life as being their primary employment. Not all of them making, Silicon Valley scale levels of income, but some of them making that much money.
Meaning hundreds
of thousands to millions of dollars a year. The people that are making the most money,
to currency you can that you can use at Starbucks.
Yeah, they're converting it out and paying their bills. Yeah. I mean, this is their real job. Those people are generally doing things like clothing, furniture, jewelry, things that are kind of highly interesting items, which in the virtual world kind of match the real world. So the people that are the top, designers and creators in the industries in Second Life are making that much money. But it's a few thousand out of that, million or so people.
So those are the entrepreneurs, if you would, in Second Life, who are, if you had to take a guess of the top paid entrepreneur, without naming names, but what's the level of income do you think a top entrepreneur?
There was a company, I think a couple, but there was a small group of people who built some amazing virtual pets in Second Life that became incredibly popular in I want to say 2008. And they made in 1 year, millions, let's just say millions of dollars. And so we as the to some extent the bookkeepers of the whole thing, were just flabbergasted. We were like, oh my God, what are these guys doing? And we went in world and we're, looking at these pets and saying, what is the amazing appeal of these things that have enabled them to...
Like a pet rock.
Yeah, exactly, like a pet rock. But it was actually breedable pets, which is... do with that what you will in terms of fascination. It was one of these things where you could have a cool little pet like a rabbit or... No, I don't think they did dogs. It was like rabbits. It was weird. And you could breed them with other people's pets, and then you could make new pets from that. So... And that idea was a very compelling one. A lot of people liked, but that general idea of having a sort of a familiar following you around in the virtual world is a pretty cool one.
Sure.
So I got it.
Large companies started using Second Life as well.
Yeah.
So what can you talk a little about which were the companies? How did they use it?
Yeah.
Do they still use it?
You know what, IBM, there's a great story. And so the question is, why would you use Second Life and not use video conferencing? And the reason is, you guys know this, because the real interaction, I just sat, I don't know which direction. I just sat in the other room here, and I talked to...
Back in that room.
I talked to 10 of you, and we were having a totally great time, and it was super entertaining, right? If this had been a video conference, that doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. So if it's video conference, we all dial into the dial-in number at the scheduled time, and bang, we're all in the same room together. But here, what I was able to do, because I got in my car and drove down here to Singularity University, was I was able to walk around with Peter and meet everybody and have these interesting conversations about, peripheral devices and proprioception in the other room. And that's what happens. That's the reality of life, is that's how we interact. We interact in a very noisy, complicated way. So one of the things about Second Life was that it enabled somebody like IBM to basically set up a big get-together, and IBM really did this, where they had like 1,000 people from around the world, small fraction of their team, but a meaningful number of people, come to this big kind of jazz event. I think they called it something jazz, where it was just a big brainstorming event for IBM, but everybody was able to come and hang out with each other and stand around and go over to this little forest or that little place and meet somebody new and get kind of titillated by meeting somebody that, that seemed kind of cool or whatever from a faraway office, and then go into the big conference hall and listen to Sam Palmisano talk about, the state of IBM, right? That is a really novel example of how the virtual world at its best can work. So I think most of the use by companies was that, and then there were a lot of companies that were trying to do marketing and exploration, and the challenge there was, of course, that there were still only 1 million early adopters in the system, and they didn't span any one easily marketed category. It was a very eclectic group of people like the gang here, and so there was no, if you were a shoe company or something, you were not going to expand your shoe sales by putting up shoe posters in Second Life.
Got it. So the virtual world you built at Second Life, fulfilled this childhood fantasy. You could fly.
Totally.
You could, it was extraordinary in that regard. But it did plateau.
Yep.
And there were limitations in what was buildable in Second Life. So for the geeks in the room here, let's talk about first of all, what made Second Life possible?
Mm-hmm.
What were the limitations you were waiting for that were transitioned, and then what's limited it so far?
Yep.
I want people to understand those barriers.
Well, the key breakover, such a great way of putting it. The key things that I think happened that enabled it, or at least enabled me to so aggressively try and build it, was still early. Like so many of the entrepreneurs here.
How much money did you ultimately raise for Second Life? Can you say that publicly?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. What I remember that I was so proud of was when we hit profitability, I think we had burned $20 million. Now, Second Life at the time, circa early 2000s, in my opinion, businesses were more expensive to build at that time because we did not have Amazon's EC2 network. We had to buy our own servers.
You still own your own servers?
We still do.
How many?
Yeah. Second Life has about 40,000 servers today.
40,000 servers. Wow.
So we didn't have these cheap infrastructures, so we could deploy that stuff. So we had to make these big capex predictions. We had to buy $300,000 worth of servers or something and deploy them in a co-location facility, literally, like ship them and truck them in. Like nobody in here even knows. You don't know what a computer looks like? Nobody here knows what a computer looks like anymore, right? They're 19 inches wide. Some people here do, of course, but this gang, but they're 19 inches wide and they're 1.5 inches high. We used to drop ship those things in big crates. Yeah, pizza boxes and crates, 40U, We'd put them in and heat them up. So it was more expensive to do it then, but I was so proud that we actually got to profitable at all.
That's pretty amazing.
But it was at about $20 million, and the initial rounds of funding we did was like $3 million was like our first round.
You put $1 million.
I put $1 million in myself. The company never would have. Yeah, it was earned from real networks money. The company would have never made it without my investment.
Sure.
That is to say, this was a crazy idea. You guys are working on really wonderful, crazy ideas, but most crazy ideas are really hard to finance. You guys know it's tough to make a business go when it's an idea that really nobody has ever heard of, like say, asteroid mining. But these are big ideas that are big, fearless ideas, and they're very hard to finance. So we had a tough time financing Second Life. We almost went out of business in late 2003, early 2004, I was pretty sure we were going to fail. It was really tough. But it was interesting. You just watched those numbers in 2004, and you could feel it. You could feel the beginning of the curve.
They were pulling out of the dot-com bust.
Yeah, exactly. You could sort of see the airplane just pulling up, and then we started to get this uplift, before anybody knew what was going on. So it was so fun, right, to be part of the team and be like, you know what, it's going to get famous here, but it's so cool to just sit here and bask in this. Like late 2004, we were like, this is going to go.
Awesome. So we were talking about what was the technology that enabled and then
right.
plateaued.
Sorry, got it.
Yeah.
Totally tangential. What enabled it was 200 kilobits per second of broadband connectivity. So I kind of had done the math around how many bits per second can I put a world in front of you where you're not going to think it's just completely boring. where it's not just going to be completely like a bunch of solid shaded cubes or something, right? So 200 kilobits per second was what I designed Second Life for. That was the first thing. And the second thing, as you mentioned, was these 3D graphics cards. The first generation of 3D GPU came out in '99, which was the NVIDIA GeForce 2. And I got that chip, and I did this little water simulation, you know, like God on the first day. And I looked at it, and I said, this is going to work. This is good enough to simulate something that looks cool. I mean, it looks doable. So that was the thing that enabled it. What I think really made Second Life not work was that...
In other words, what caused it to plateau?
Yeah, what made it hard was that I underestimated how difficult it was to both, well, at the tactical level, use your computer to move around in and experience a 3D world, one in which you weren't just clicking or pointing and shooting at something like you were in a game, but you had to, like, you know, click this thing and move it over there, or bend something, or draw a little bit, so to speak, build. The difficulty of both moving and editing objects in a 3D world using a 2 degree of freedom mouse and your other hand on the keyboard as a kind of a chord. I always think of it as like chording, you know, like it's a piano chord. You know, you play 3 keys. I mean, Second Life is ridiculous. You had to hit 3 keys at once, you know, to be like up. And so you learned this incredibly difficult language of moving the mouse and using your finger on the keyboard. And I think that was the big tactical impediment. You know, we were all experts at it. So we were like, what are you guys all talking about? Come on, come one, come all. New York Times, you know. Everybody, it'll be so much fun. But it's like learning to play the violin or something. I mean, it's doable, but it's very, very hard.
Interface, I/O.
So that was the first thing. And then I think, as we were talking about earlier, the other problem was just that there were a lot of problems. It was that you had to commit a huge amount of time and energy and mental effort into, for example, just entering the world, just the process of sort of being born in Second Life and like creating your avatar. I mean, how many people in here found it rather daunting to create an avatar, right? Like everybody that used Second Life, right? I mean, it's well, not everybody, 3, but it is really, really difficult to insert yourself into a world that has all this energy in it. You know, it was like I used to say it was like being dropped out of a helicopter into the middle of New York with a bus map. You know, and like, go for it. New York awaits you. You know, and you get a bus map. And I mean, that was about what Second Life felt like. That was about the level of technology. We couldn't really tell you what to do because it wasn't a guided tour. You know, it was this big open-ended Wild West. But that really works against any kind of casual use or rapid integration into it. And then building your avatar and defining who you were, which we were talking about earlier. It's a really good point, you know, to just create your look. You'd walk into the world and you'd see the most spectacularly beautiful, complex, iconic people you've ever seen. Everyone in there is like David Bowie and Lady Gaga, right? And you're just, and you realize, like, well, it's going to take me, I mean, we're all competitive, right? You're like, I want to look good or normal or whatever, and you realize, like, that'll be 120 hours from now, logged on. So that was really hard, and that limited, I think, growth.
So, I think it's important for the group to realize how far, you know, from 200 kilobits per second, right, and the first NVIDIA card to today is quantum. I mean, we're 100x,
Totally.
if not 1,000x. And you left the board. You left as CEO when? What
2009.
Year? 2009. Started Coffee and Power.
Yep.
And recently, you said it's time.
Yep.
It's time. It's time to do, you know, as probably Steve Jobs said, you know, it's time to go back and redo Apple. And now it's time to go back and redo the virtual world. Yep. You call the new company what?
Well, the new company is High Fidelity.
High Fidelity.
Which is kind of a part of the whole answer, or, you know, part of the idea. Like you said, that 10x difference. If you look at what we can do today, what digital environments are starting to look like, they are high fidelity. There are so many ways in which they're now sort of almost outperforming the real world, or they're just incredibly sensual and beautiful and complex.
So, Hi-Fi started how long ago?
Hi-Fi, we really started working about 6 months ago, and we've been hiring people since then. We're 10 people now. It's such a fun time for those of you who've been there.
Yeah.
10 people.
Love
But you know, we were 5 of us at the beginning of the year. We had Coffee and Power, and we turned it into High Fidelity, financed it, and put our heads down and started working on this 6 months ago.
Within, you know, you're very open. You believe in sort of an open conversation and it's just part of the SU culture that's really important is a lot of the world, and we talked about this last time, a lot of the world, what makes Silicon Valley what I learned from you, to give Philip credit, and if we maybe go back and talk about it later, but what makes Silicon Valley work are two things you said: the density of entrepreneurs and how open entrepreneurs are.
Exactly.
Literally, you can go and tell your grandest secrets, because coming up with the idea is not the hard part. It's execution that's the hard part. And so one of the things that I really want SU's culture to be about is really open transaction of ideas. Like, here's my great idea. What do you think about it? Can you give me some great feedback? Right? Versus, no, I'm not going to tell you because, and a lot of the world is, no, I'm not going to tell you. And that's why they don't have a Silicon Valley to a great degree.
True.
Having said that, there's certain things that probably shouldn't be said right now, and you decide that. But what is your vision of high fidelity? Where are you going with it? What do you want to do? What's going to be different than Second Life?
Well, let me start with, what's the story, right? Like,
Sure.
What's the moment? Because for me, the moment with Second Life was this. It was really that we knew broadband was going to make it. We had been watching the statistics on broadband at Real Networks. I was the CTO at Real Networks. And so because we were streaming audio and video and for the most part failing to do it, I mean, it was really early, we were passionately interested in like the adoption of broadband. And so Mitch Capor, our great guy and investor in Second Life, biggest investor in Second Life,
The creator
great friend.
Mitch Capor, the creator of
Lotus.
Lotus.
Sorry, Mitch Capor. Oh my gosh, it's been years. The creator of Lotus 1-2-3, just a really famous guy in the computer industry. And at the time, Mitch Capor and Bill Gates were the two kind of the two monsters of the industry in the 80s. But Mitch, I remember, said this broadband thing's going to go all the way. Anyway, so that was the moment that was the killer for Second Life. For high fidelity, I'll tell you, it was a couple things, and we were talking about this earlier. It's great. One was, I was playing with the Oculus Rift in there, and everybody here's played with the Oculus Rift, right? So I took the same little, last part of last year, I ordered a little breakout board that had that same gyro, the same little gyro that detects rotation that the Oculus uses to move your view around, this incredible little gyro chip. And I got it on a little board. I'm an electronics guy, and I hooked it up to an oscilloscope, and I stuck the thing to a pair of glasses, and I put the glasses on my head. And I looked at the oscilloscope, and I moved my head, and I watched that thing just go woo, woo, just as incredibly sensitive. I moved my head, and I was watching up and down. And I said, I didn't know these things were this good. And so then I made this little avatar that was just a little Ernie from Bert and Ernie. Just this little head guy with bulgy eyes and a round head and a little mouth that kind of moved with how loud you were talking. And I can show you a video of that. We have a great video on our site of that, but it's out in the wild. But and basically, we all looked at this thing in the mirror. I looked at this thing in the mirror, and I sort of turned my head. And we hooked it up so that there was no latency, much less than one video frame of latency at 60 frames per second. So there's only about 10 milliseconds of latency, which is really fast. And I hooked it up, and I looked at it, and I kind of moved my head back and forth. And I turned my head, and I said, you guys, come over here and see this, and we put the glasses on everybody, and we all sat there and we looked at the computer screen, looked at that mirror of ourselves as an avatar looking back at us, moving that perfectly. These sensors, these gyros are more sensitive than our eyes can see. They can sense like a 100th of a degree per second in rotation, which we routinely can't see, or at any distance we can't see. Incredibly sensitive, so that was the one thing where we were like, maybe we should start another company now and start doing this. Talk about that 100x change.
Yeah, sure.
There was nothing. 2001, we wouldn't have dreamed of anything like that. And then the second thing was we started thinking about everybody's computers. And like, here was this thought I had. I'll share this. This is stuff that most people don't know, but you guys are a great gang. I started thinking, okay, so how much does everybody use Second Life? 1 hour a day. Turns out that's the number. Turns out the amount of time you spend in the virtual world is about an hour a day. About 4 hours at a time, but not everybody logs in every day. But it rounds out to about an hour a day. Now, how many days an hour, how many hours a day do you sleep? You sleep 8 hours or something like that. So you use the virtual world 1 hour, you sleep 8 hours. I don't know if you see where I'm going with this yet. Second Life has 40,000 computers and 1 million users. So I started thinking, well, wait a minute. How about if I used your computer while you were asleep? If I used your computer while you're asleep, I could get 8 hours of time from your computer for your 1 hour of use. Let's round that up to 10 to 1. So what that means is if there was 100,000 people online using a virtual world, I'd have 1 million computers to simulate the virtual world with, if I could figure out how to use all your computers at home. So we started looking at latency and capabilities and like thinking in general about, could we build a virtual world, right, where we broke it all up into these little assignments or little cloud-like chunks that were capable of being distributed to all these machines. And then again, like you said, perfect point, is this disruptive change of like, that is a factor of like 100 times more computing than we have in the virtual world today for free. I mean, not for free, but I mean, everybody would be willing to chip in to get back the value they got from it. Yeah. And so that was the second thing where we were like, we saw these gyros, and we started thinking about that, and we said, we got to stop what we're working on with Coffee and Power. This is lock and load. You know, we can. This
change
is just
the
going to
world,
be crazy.
create
if
new
we can
worlds.
do it.
Amazing stuff. And so you had these aha moments that were that gave you a vision of what could be. I want to talk a little bit about what that could be is like. Okay, so can we talk in a 10-year time frame?
Yeah.
Right, because you went from the startup of Second Life in what year?
Well, really, I started Second Life in 2000, late 99.
When did the first version
It
really
launched in 2003, middle of 2003.
So three-year startup.
Yep, and it got famous. Second Life really grew to have a significant amount of use in like 2005, 2006.
Okay, so 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give it that 6 years plus a little bit.
Wow, 2020, right?
All right, so we're 2020, 2022. What do you think is going to be possible in that virtual world? What's it going to feel like to be there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, if I can have millions or even hundreds of millions or billions of machines
that you're not having to pay for.
Yeah, that we're not going to pay for. That everybody's
excess capacity that's living there that you'll contribute for some incentive.
Yeah. So, if we can build an economy or some sort of collective network around everybody's machines. First of all, the richness and detail of this virtual world, especially given the exponential increase in computing, even since and exactly since I started Second Life. First of all, the virtual world is going to be just absolutely stunning. I was saying to Peter earlier that the real world's like biosystems and its richness is kind of limited by the amount of sort of atoms and interactions we have and how much sunlight hits the earth. So one thing is simply that the visual scale of what we see in movies today, for example, is going to be what we see in virtual worlds. In 5 or 6 years, I mean, this is a law that's been true for a long time, what we see in movies today, in CG movies today, so think of Avatar think of the later ones that have come out, that's what these virtual worlds are going to look and feel like live, right? So one thing is, who's not going to want to go there? The second thing is, why would we have meetings? I mean, if we can make eye contact, if we can nod our heads, like I was saying, this first experiment we did, if we can hear each other perfectly in 3D. So for example, what if when somebody's asking a question here, just by the act of my looking at that person, we'll all be able to hear them? That, for example, is one of the things we're looking at. Well, that's easy to do in a virtual world. Why would we have meetings in the real world? Why would we travel for business? Just for business. We might travel for fun, but why would we travel for business with the expense and difficulty of it if we can make eye contact? If we can talk to each other perfectly, if we can meet as a group, if we can stand by the water cooler. And I, for one, see absolutely nothing in the interface technology that will stop us from reaching that point. In fact, I think that we'll reach that point of like the perfect business meeting years before 2020. I mean, we're going to get there fast.
Okay, we're 2013 right now. That's 7 years away.
Yeah.
So I want to parse this because it's really, I mean, you guys need to understand how impactful this is, right? Because we're talking about hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars of potential economy. You said 5 years latency. So if I'm watching Avatar, the computer-generated characters in Avatar are pretty stunningly both beautiful and I could feel like there was a living being there.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at depth cameras. We're experimenting with, talking about this earlier, we're experimenting with depth cameras. We're experimenting with these gyros I mentioned. We're experimenting with things like the Leap that I'm sure everybody here has played with. If I can render an avatar for you that looks like the people in Avatar, and it moves as fluidly and perfectly as you do, why on earth would you attend a business meeting as a human body.
Why would you schlep yourself for 12 hours
Burn gas.
and $1,000?
There's no way. You'll log in.
So we're talking about disrupting the way conferences and events are done. We're talking about disrupting business travel to a large degree.
Yep.
Because I'm traveling to a business meeting because I can't have this kind of an interaction.
Yep.
So what makes this kind of an interaction? What are the pieces that make this kind of interaction more intimate and real that didn't exist in Second Life?
Totally.
And what can you achieve?
Well, first of all, like as a research company, and I think of ourselves as a prototyping team right now, we don't know, and that's what we're aiming to find out.
Yeah.
But you know what does make it real? So I guess I'll start with the one thing that people don't think about. Everybody thinks about like bits per second or pixels, right? But I think a lot of the intimacy that we feel when we sit here, when we talk to each other right here, which is even more intimate, is driven by latency. It's driven by the number of milliseconds that it takes for the visual and auditory information of my communication with you, you seeing the movement of my body, feeling the rotation of my head, feeling where my eyes are looking. The amount of time it takes that information to reach you is really critical. We've done a lot of experiments at High Fidelity on like what the magic number is. And there's not a magic number. Like two musicians playing together where they're playing jazz and they're basically talking to each other and they're communicating, they're playing back and forth. I'm not a great musician, so I don't actually understand this, but there's this kind of challenge response that musicians are doing. We've tested how many milliseconds it takes to break that link. The answer is about 15. Other people have done this test, but we redid it. It's pretty interesting. The point where the break happens, where you start to not feel like you're communicating with somebody face to face, is at about 100, 120, 140 milliseconds. Your cell phones today, by the way, are at 450.
Wow.
They suck. It's one of the reasons we're not using cell phones anymore.
The delay for a conversation is a half a second?
From your mouth to my ears, 450 milliseconds on AT&T, 290 on Verizon, so get Verizon. But it's still too long. It's 290 is still dead. It's over. That's why we don't use cell phones.
What do I notice when I'm having a conversation?
We're stepping on each other. That you're talking.
No, what do I notice? When do I start noticing
when do you start noticing it? You start noticing it at about 100 and 150 for dialogue, especially if it's voice-only dialogue, maybe closer to 180. But it's not. 290 is way, way, way too much. You start to notice your own voice echoed back to you at about 50 to 70 milliseconds. You start to feel like, ooh, this is creepy. I'm listening to kind of a weird echo. So latency is one thing. Another one is body language. Like more than half of our communication right now, even from you guys to us, is you reading visual signals. But you need to see our whole bodies to do that because there's very subtle behavior that's happening. For example, Peter's nodding very slightly while he listens to me. Some of you are too. The amount that you're nodding is giving me feedback that you're listening and interested. If I look directly at Peter, his nodding behavior changes. It generally accentuates. You guys are all going to start thinking about this now, right? This has been studied since the 70s, and we're trying to recreate that in High Fidelity. We want to make it so that you can feel that fluid synchrony. It's also synchronous behavior. We're nodding in the anticipation of me finishing my sentence at a certain point. So this is like an important part of communication. So I think it's that. Maybe seeing eye contact, although I love eye contact. I find it both intimidating and exciting myself. But as I've gotten to learn more about it, I'm not sure. Like that matters a lot too. But we're just looking at all these technologies with the goal of basically exploiting all this wonderful hardware, depth cameras, sensors, and stuff that are coming out, all with the goal of basically breaking through that barrier. My like rallying cry at work is like we will end business travel. We will break through that emotional perceptual barrier that stands between us, even with the best, even with like the big video conferencing rigs, right?
When do you think the first major virtual world enabled business conference will occur?
I don't know. That's a great question. If we could do something good, if we get this stuff together, 4 or 5 years from now, where you go to something and you're like, that was crazy.
That was worth
really
it.
There. Yeah.
In fact, I will pay extra to attend virtually.
Yeah, exactly, to save the $2,000 in flight and time.
All right. So I've been talking about that from the telepresence robots. Like I'll pay extra, but if I can go with virtual world, fascinating. So I really want to dig into this a little bit more because it's the economy in Second Life was, so you said, $600 million?
Yep.
$600 million.
600 and some, yeah.
So we're talking again 2020, 2023, end of this decade, a 10 years from now time frame. What is the potential for a virtual world economy in the future?
I mean, it's got to be. I mean, just like what we're seeing with 3D printing and digital goods, it's got to become. It's got to become like a large single digit or something of the world's aggregate GDP. I mean, we're going to get all, it's like you always talk about, we're going to get all this new value growth that's happening.
The world's annual GDP
is what?
Is about $40 trillion.
Yeah, so it's got to be trillions.
In the hundreds of billions to trillion. So imagine, if you would, if I told you there was a frontier out there where there was going to be $1 trillion of new revenue created in the next decade. I mean, would that be an interesting place to go play? You know, I'm sitting here, the year is early 1800s, we're in Virginia, and I'm saying, you know, the trains just connected us to the West Coast, and there's this virtual gold rush going on out there.
It's going to be a lot of trains. Yeah, it's just, you know, there's nothing that I've seen in the experience that I've had with Second Life, other than being sort of early, that dissuades me. I mean, obviously that's why I'm here. That's why I'm working high fidelity. But I was waiting for the moment to kind of jump back in. There's nothing that convinces me that any of the things that are exciting and were exciting about virtual worlds to me when I started Second Life are not still true today. I think that it's just a matter of time and learning. You know, we're cultural animals. We take up cultural traditions. We solve problems in certain ways because we've always done it that way. So there is kind of an impedance around waiting for us to do that. But I mean, we're going to start discovering that, you know, for example, business meetings are incredibly easier and empowered, you know, by this virtual world experience. You know, obviously, I can show you a picture of something on a flat screen that's, you know, 40 feet across if I want to in a virtual world. This stuff is going to start, the tree is going to start leaning in that direction, and it's not going to stop because it's going to be driven by the economic imperatives. So,
especially if you have you can turn on a real physics model and do research.
Yeah,
that will be interesting.
Yeah, exactly. What's it going to be like to work together on a, you know, physical prototype of something that you can 3D print with it, you know, by group selecting it and saying print? I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. But how many things are we not even going to use the real world for? I always used to say, what are we going to do with all the buildings in New York? I mean, you talk about, you know, our culture has migrated toward the city, and it continues to do so, right?
It's funny.
I'm almost like, we're gonna have handball in them, or are we gonna live in them? I think we'll live in them. I mean, it'd be cool to live in like some really tall lower New York skyscraper.
So let's talk about that. So in a world where, in an avatar-like fidelity world, if you understood what the hell I meant by that, where you can go, transact, live, work, play, meet people, all of those things, what wouldn't you do?
Yeah, what wouldn't you do? I mean, I always say we can't smell each other. I mean, it's really hard to smell. It's really, I mean, as everybody knows, there's always a company making virtual smell, but you know, molecules drifting through the air, kind of our last. Of course, the gang here is like, oh, that'll be easy, but most people would concur that it's going to be pretty difficult to make us smell things at a distance. But I think that you know, what will we not do? I think that here's what I think. I mean, modifying that question a little bit. The future of cities. I'm really fascinated by cities because cities are so interesting. They're this emergent structure. We come together, and we've used cities for different things over the years. We use them as trading posts, right? And then we use them as centers for industry. And then we use them as centers for finance and information exchange, which is kind of what they are now. Light industry, south of Market in San Francisco used to be manufacturing. Now that manufacturing has moved overseas. But basically, we still come together to have these crazy meetings in these rooms. But what's so weird about virtual reality is that it seems to me that virtual reality kind of will ultimately pull away that last reason why we came to cities, which was to have these dense meeting places, right? So then the question is, why will we live in cities at all? Now, I still think we will, because the presence of others is such a compelling, dynamic, you know, such a wonderful thing. But I bet we'll do it out of affinity, right? Isn't that interesting? Like, if you look at the virtual world, a lot of its connections are made through affinity, right? You get, like, everybody that's playing Minecraft, right? And the people that are playing Minecraft kind of share a certain age and attitude and, mental orientation about the world, I bet you, I mean, I don't know, I don't bet you, but I wonder if New York or London, or Rio won't become places that are, where people are drawn together more by a certain lifestyle or a certain affinity than they are by this particular transaction of getting together face-to-face and conducting a business meeting, which is just going to go totally to the virtual city, whatever that means.
And people are going to be able to live anywhere and work anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
So
rural property will be more valuable. I mean, all these weird observations.
Yeah. I mean, and Detroit, despite its problems, can have lots of work now. I mean, you'll get a flattening of job opportunities across.
Doesn't Detroit almost feel like the emergence of affinity culture? I mean, what is Detroit now? It's this funky place where there's these entrepreneurs and artists, right, that are hanging out. That's totally that line, because what it was before was a place where you made cars. And it's probably not going to be a place where you make cars anymore, right, or at least in the long view. And so people are coming together there just because they enjoy hanging out there. It's such an interesting thing, you know.
So let's talk about the large corporation and virtual. How should large auto manufacturers, the Dow Chemicals, the large cell phone companies, the large manufacturers, how should they be thinking about virtual worlds?
Well, I think like all disruptive changes in the past, the issue is more that large companies, so this virtual technology is going to be there, but most large companies, and the larger the company is, the more so this will be true, will fail to exploit the technologies that the smaller companies will, and the smaller companies will eat their lunch, as they always have. I mean, this process has been going on over time.
Dinosaurs and mammals.
Yep, exactly. So the thing is really like, what isn't a large company doing, right? Like large companies are going to deploy the technology. They're going to deploy virtual reality, right, to their benefit. In fact, some of them will probably do it in a very headstrong and forward-looking and forward-spending kind of a way. But what I think they won't do is they won't make the cultural adaptations that go along with those changes. You know what I mean? What they won't see right in front of them, what they won't see happening.
They'll still print out their emails.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. They'll still print out their emails, right? They'll still have their command hierarchies that expect an opaque organization in which people are unaware of what's going on. In which a manager has to dole out the assignments, right? It's the young companies that are like, dude, I already know all that. Like, I read that. I saw that. I saw that online. I saw it in the virtual world. I think that's what's going to happen.
So let's talk about, I'm fascinated about the large company, what we call sort of the linear company versus exponential company.
Right.
The places that even the most brain-dead linear companies will start to use virtual worlds. So we talked about one, which is instead of spending $1 million to fly executives from around the world for a meeting, you'll save that money by
having a sales meeting, right? Some very linear company will no longer spend $2,000 to send some guy to New York to go have a meeting, and that'll be fantastic. They'll spend $200, but they'll have the exact same meeting as before. They'll shake hands and close, and get something done. But the company itself, the infrastructure of the company, won't be affected by these changes.
So that's one thing. So large sales meetings, maybe even sales calls, conferences, get-togethers. So we'll stop that kind of travel. Another level could be today most companies co-locate.
Yep.
So the question is, I think you'll have the linear company in the future, if you would, and
right.
Let me not make the statements, let me sort of toss it over to you.
Yep.
What's the difference between how those kinds of companies might be organized when you have high-fidelity virtual worlds?
Yeah, exactly. Like most companies today make a striking differentiation in the type of job you do based on how close you are to home base. Right? I mean, that's basically the thing. I mean, the more leveraged and the more strategic jobs, or the jobs that are core competencies for the company's success, are generally done at the
headquarters.
The headquarters.
I mean, you wouldn't be the CFO and not be at the headquarters.
Yep, exactly. And but if you think about this long tail where skill is distributed and then where your skill is concentrated in your company, right? This is a profound difference. If virtual reality opens up the situation where your CFO or your most valuable researcher could easily be somewhere across the world, and you just have to, as a manager, as a CEO, deal with the fact that, this girl is not in the main office. You got to live with that. You got to find how to get value from her when she's not there. That it seems to me that is like that's going to be like a 10x differential, right? Because that tail is so long, and the skills are going to become increasing. I mean, you've talked a lot about how, if everybody gets really smart really quickly, then the long tail around skills and labor becomes all the more profoundly long. And the companies that are unable to, the companies that are still trying to fly everybody to live in San Francisco, for example, where the cost of living is enormously high, to get value out of them and watch them while they work, is just going to see a 10x difference against the companies that don't.
So all of a sudden, to translate that, if I can afford an amazing CEO or an amazing CFO who happens to be in India, and being paid a tenth of what you're paid, instead of $1 million salary in San Francisco, they're getting $100,000, which is still a huge amount of money. All of a sudden, my whole labor rate changes.
Yeah. I've traveled around a lot. You were talking about my thoughts about Silicon Valley and my Silicon Valley's leverage. But yeah, I don't think there's ever been, maybe I've got a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because I didn't go to Stanford. I didn't kind of grow up in Silicon Valley. I went to UC San Diego. You know what? The school was really good. I don't think there's a big difference in outcomes around whether you go to a faraway school or a school that's, one of the supposedly best in the world in terms of your education. There is in terms of the network you get stuck in, but the actual skill sets are about the same. So if these skill sets are rapidly coming up around the world, why couldn't you hire your CEO in India? 10 years ago, there were no CEOs in India. Break.
Now they're running multi-billion-dollar companies.
Yeah, and so why wouldn't you do that? And then you're exactly right? That's going to be what maybe it could be a 10x difference in comp, right? So that's profoundly disruptive.
So what other disruptive uses of virtual worlds would an exponential thinking company perhaps make use of? Travel, employment base.
Yeah, I wonder if at some point the distribution of knowledge and technology and products isn't going to grow profoundly into the virtual arena as well, right? I guess if what you're selling is entertainment or education or something else that can be delivered online, and you don't take advantage of the fact that you can now fluidly deliver this end product to everybody, even beyond 3D printing. You don't even need a 3D printer when it's virtual reality.
So interesting.
You just deliver it as bits.
So what things become dematerialized here in the world become rematerialized in the virtual world, and so you've got an entire second market.
Right, and then it's so disruptive to suddenly recognize that you've now got, if 10% of people like pink shoes, then it's 10% of people all over the world. And you've built your company's infrastructure to go after 10% of Americans. And so there's an enormous disruption, right? When you're open to a virtual world, well, not shoes being a very poor example, when you're open to a virtual world in which you can distribute that product uniformly amongst an audience that comes from everywhere. One of the experiences I always had in Second Life, and I still can't get my head around it, is that why would you be a live band in Second Life? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you is because they can't really see you on stage, which is the stuff we're working on in High Fidelity. But why would you try to break out as a band in Second Life? Now, it's interesting. You might think, well, Second Life doesn't have as large of an audience in any one place. There's only 100 people. But. Those 100 people are basically randomly selected from the Second Life user base. So what does that mean? It means that 65% of them are from Europe, which is a kind of marketing reach.
If you're a hit in the virtual world, you might be a hit in the real world.
And this actually already happened a little bit in Second Life. You're going to hit so much wider.
So what you're saying then is if I'm a company trying to prototype new products and so forth, I might be better able to rapidly prototype and test in the virtual world. And what products work there, I'll materialize in the real world.
And there are some tastemaker experiments, for example, in fashion, that are going on today. I can't name I'm not saying I can't name the companies because I can't tell you. I can't remember the companies, but there have been articles about designers and companies that actually are test marketing products in Second Life for that reason. Not because they're going to potentially sell the stuff to those people, but because if you just walk into a room, like the joke says, in Second Life, you got these people from all over the world, where if you walk into a room, even here, this room doesn't exhibit the diversity. Actually, it comes darn close, but it doesn't exhibit the diversity that, you guys from all over, but it doesn't exhibit the diversity that you get in a virtual world. And that's only going to grow as we get a wider and wider cross-section and a lowering of barriers around using these things.
So once when you're getting to 100 million users, in the virtual world, you've got two things. You have a large real market to sell into, and you've got a large market to test products in for the real world, and you might actually do your R&D in the virtual world. That you materialize into the real world.
Obviously, I think design is just going to grow and grow to become a more virtual activity, right? We're already virtualizing. It feels like we're kind of accreting away the different early steps of design and going more toward manufacturing. And of course, 3D printing and manufacturing itself becoming almost completely digital is fascinating.
Philip, do large companies have a future?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. And when I say I don't know, I don't mean I don't know. I think they don't. What I mean is I don't know. I really don't know, because there are these tremendous forces that, of course, exploit efficiency. So there's this thing. You've got me talking about this here before. There's this wonderful thing. How many people know Coase's theorem? Coase's theorem. Does anybody know the theorem of the firm, the nature of the firm? Nobody in here knows that? Oh, you guys should look that up. It's pretty cool. Coase's theorem. Coase was this guy who won the Nobel Prize recently, actually. He's old now. He won the Nobel Prize for work that he did, I think, in 1930-something is when he wrote this thing. And what he basically said was, if efficient markets, if a market is the best way to regulate how people interact with each other, if free markets where people can price their labor to each other, Peter, I'll do this consulting for you for $1,000 and help you with your project. If that is the best way to regulate people's behavior, what this guy said was, why are there companies at all? Why aren't we all just independent contractors? So he basically said, and this is what he won the Nobel Prize for. He won the Nobel Prize for his answer. His answer was, he said, look, there's a cost of negotiating with each person each time you set a price on what you're doing together. You're going to do my prototype. We got to spend like 5 minutes deciding that. Well, if it's only 10 minutes of work for you to do the thing that we spent 5 minutes negotiating for, we just imposed a 33% cost on the transaction around that. And what Coase observed was, hey, the reason companies must exist is on account of it's easier to just say, oh, for God's sakes, Peter, can I just pay you $150,000 a year, and I'll just put some stuff on your desk, and you can go home and complain that I give you too much work to do. But basically, it'll work out at the end. I'll get more value from you because you won't have to negotiate. We won't have to negotiate these prices. Anyways, so he won the Nobel Prize for this because people thought it was a pretty good observation about microeconomics more. So here's the thing. What does technology say to Coase's theorem, right? Oh, my God, it says everything, right? So what's happening is transparency and speed and communication naturally lowers the cost of negotiation, right? We can find out more about each other. We can decide, we can specify what we want done better and better and better. And so what that means is that inevitably there's this huge force driven by that towards smaller and smaller companies. Why would you waste time even going to work for a company when when essentially the value doesn't overcome what you can do by just operating as a free agent? So technology, in its reduction of barriers, naturally drives us towards smaller companies. There will be smaller companies in many industries, I would say, because of the inexorable progress of technology. But what I would say, though, is that, and you've talked about this before, there are often like new markets that emerge or new behaviors that emerge that are completely emergent, totally unpredictable. So there may be some, great, empire-like companies that are created just by the efficiencies and scale that technology enables. There may be big global companies that are enabled by these communication pathways. So that's where I would say, if you put a gun to my head and said, it's very, very important, you know the correct answer to this, in the aggregate, will there be more or less big companies? I'd say the obvious speaks to a lot of reduction in size, but there's probably still going to be some weird counterpoints.
Large-scale platforms, Google manipulating information, where scale of information is valuable.
Yeah, look at Google, exactly. Yeah. That's something where, first mover's advantage and network effects, right? Network effects work profoundly against this. eBay won in its marketplace just enormously because of potent, unassailable network effects, and that was also driven by technology.
Would you ever see a large company come into existence in the virtual world?
Boy, I hope so. That'll be interesting, the first ones to see, right? Will they be the great dark empires predicted by science fiction? I love that question. Will there be these big evil companies that we always forecast? Or will they be some Google-like thing? I don't know. But I can only imagine that there will be native advantages to virtual worlds. That there'll be the natives of these virtual worlds, whatever that word comes to mean, that will exploit completely internal systems. Like that pet breeding company that I told you, the people that made millions of dollars, right? That's like a native farmer. That's somebody that, those guys grew up in Second Life. They didn't come there to try and exploit it or exploit its users. They came there to, they were there and they were like, wow, what'd be neat would be breathable pets.
But when we get to a point of a $1 trillion economy, and there are potentially, tens, hundreds of millions of users, you're going to have people, a large percentage of those people probably, I'm guessing, working and earning their living in Second Life.
Yeah, I'm just sitting and thinking, like, will it be like the Flextronics of the future that happens?
What does that mean?
Will it
They
be
just came
like
on as a sponsor. What is Flextronics of the future?
Oh,
mean?
really? Well, like if somebody is a really complex design and build supply chain, and it's not just Flextronics. There's all these neat startups now that are doing this really cool stuff. Like I heard, what is it, PCH? PCH is a company that's doing a lot of. They represent like thousands of factories in China. I mean, that is fascinating. You've got one company, it's an Irish company, and they represent these thousands of factories, and they will help you do like design, build, parcel stuff out to these companies, get it back, get it into production, get it to distribution. I wonder whether in the virtual world you won't have these like crazy kind of soup to nuts sort of supply chain and design and build companies that happen in there. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out. I'm thinking of one. That would be rather cool to be able to just go into the virtual world and say, I want you guys to build me a new kind of electric car. And then the whole thing just kind of, and then it actually shows up on the roads, at some endpoint.
Let's talk about politics in the virtual world. I always think about there's no place you can go on Earth today and start a new government.
Right.
All of the sort of blank territory has been claimed. Right. At least you can't do it without the use of large guns.
Yeah. But you can in the virtual world.
You can in the virtual world. So do you imagine people experimenting in governments?
Well, here's the question. I mean, yes, and then there has been some experimentation in Second Life, and I expect there to be much more. I'll give you two examples of that. Two examples. One is, the first thing that fascinated me was consider this very real example, right? Two people get in a fight in Second Life, and one of them wants to take the other one to court. Now, this has happened a number of times now. But let's imagine for a moment that one of them lives in England and the other one lives in, say, Germany. I'll pick two countries that are like relatively close to each other politically, whatever. Whose law applies? One of them has, and this has happened many times in Second Life, one of them infringed the copyrights of the other and basically copied his or her works and is reselling them. The other one, under the laws of his or her country, is seeking redress from the other. This is one of the things where, as a CEO, I used to say, I don't know what's going to happen. And people say, well, it has to be judged under the laws of California because that's where the servers are. It's like, really? Is that really is that going to be a long-lasting finding? So that's one thing, right? Is like we're going to have to build law in the virtual world, in cyberspace, as John Perry Barlow famously wrote about, but at the very beginning. But we're going to have to build some sort of laws because you're not going to be able to find a balance point between all these different systems. The other example that I was thinking of, I knew I was going to do that. I was going to forget what the other example was. I'm trying to think of there was an interesting political test. I'll think of it in a minute, but yeah.
One of the biggest challenges, and I was speaking about this, on our road to abundance, we're going to be seeing turbulence. We're going to see a lot of the structures of governments today will not hold as the rate of innovation is increasing, right? The IP system is going to collapse.
Absolutely.
Social Security in the U.S. will collapse.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to experiment with new systems. You can't get people to agree to anything here. One idea is, I had this joke over dinner with Larry Page talking about, Google governance, where you just online, you vote on Google for your, sort of a true democracy. But that won't happen. But it could happen in the virtual world.
It can, and I'll tell you why. And that ties into what I forgot, and I just remembered it, which is what I call blacklisting. So imagine that there's this huge economy in the virtual world and that you're making money in it. And imagine that you go over to Peter's house and you do something bad. Peter's super pissed off. And Peter belongs to a group, a kind of a collective. And the deal is, if Peter and 10 other reasonable members say, for example, what do they say about a jury? 7
Reasonable Men.
7 Reasonable Men or whatever. If Peter can get a jury within this collective to say that I was profoundly wrong in my behavior at his house, I will not be allowed to enter the property of or conduct business transactions in the virtual world. Oh, by the way, this is not going to trouble my original government, wherever I actually live as a human person, right? Peter is going to basically put me on this list. And the collective that he belongs to represents 40% of the people in the virtual world. So if he can put me on that blacklist where I'm basically not allowed to do commerce with those people, is that the same as dying? Well, it almost is, right? I mean, that has so much power. That's 40% of my income for my business, right? All Peter has to do, all that has to happen is a collective of people who have a reasonable Google government way, 7 reasonable men or whatever, of deciding whether I was in the wrong or not. And all they have to do then is put me on an electronic list, oh so easily managed compared to the real world, which would then kind of keep me from commercial access to their people, that group, and maybe keep me from coming into their properties. That is not necessarily a fate worse than death, but it's a pretty bad fate. And in my opinion, that is going to happen, right? Like, that is going to happen in virtual worlds.
Effectively, you're being put in jail.
Yeah, you're being put in jail. And It was like the joke, right? Hot Tub Time Machine, if anybody saw that. They had that Second Life bit in it where the guy was in jail in Second Life and he just kept playing because he was such an idiot or whatever. But, I think that is going to happen. We are going to see that.
So, but I am curious about the notion of being able to experiment with new government systems. Like, let's try what a flat tax looks like. Let's try what a new form of election, of a true democracy, of being able to literally, I mean, one of the biggest problems is you can't iterate governments easily.
Yeah, there's so much impedance.
Because bloodshed is usually a result of iteration.
Yeah, totally. I mean, can you imagine the experiments in direct democracy with like 100,000 people in Second Life or, in High Fidelity participating in, some sort of collective governance where you just use immediate electronic, direct question and reaction behavior that then ripples through the society almost instantly. That's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. And I'm with you. I mean, I think that in the long term, I'm profoundly an optimist with respect to where this goes. I mean, freedom of information, transparency, low barriers to transactions, low barriers between people make the world a better place. There is no question about that. But are there going to be speed bumps along the way?
Yeah.
Yes. It's not going to be a smooth ride.
And so one of the questions is, how do you ameliorate? We were having a conversation yesterday, I forget exactly with who, about how do you ameliorate the speed bumps along the way? And one of the ways might be, can you iterate and test solutions in virtual worlds now?
Yeah. That's so true.
In advance of the speed bumps occurring, where the stakes are lower, and say, listen, we did the experiment at a level of 10 million. We did 10 experiments with 1 million people each, and this one clearly won.
And I think the only thing that's kept us from that in Second Life is it's not a representative populace. It's a small group, and it's people who are very they're early adopters. They're smart. They're intense. They're a little bit crazy sometimes. I mean, it's an amazing group.
By the way, I mean, I'm trying to think about the creative uses of a virtual world for companies. So imagine, if you would, where you have 2 or 3 different marketing campaigns that you want to use, or 2 or 3 different CMOs you want to hire, where you can parallel process them. Imagine being able to let's try all 10 campaigns at once, where the cost of actually doing that. So you have a lot more, lean startup can apply to large companies, if you would.
Yeah, can you test things in the virtual world with kind of less impact on the future, as a test case? Can you, is everybody consensually okay with that? It's fascinating.
So one of the biggest speed bumps on the way coming up is the impact of AI and robotics on job markets.
Yeah.
So, it's a speed bump I know is coming, right? I have you had Frederic come, one of our alumni, who wrote a book, which I love the title of, Robots Will Steal Our Jobs, But That's Okay. And he talks about the implications. So I think about, and I was talking to my good friend Salim Ismail, who I think Salim, and we're talking about what's the future, not of jobs, the future of occupation. The future of how do you occupy yourself. So in the end state, 10, 20, 30 years from now, cost of energy has dropped because of solar, water is available, robotics provide health and education and so forth, and the cost of living is much lower. I only have to work maybe a couple days a week versus 7 days. What do I do with my time? Are people living a large amount of their time exploring virtual worlds? Is that where we're going?
And how much of our collective experience and value creation and money making and stuff shifts to what we would kind of call entertainment today, right? I mean, that's just fascinating. Like, how much will we just be succeeding or failing relative to each other in proportion to how much we're able to entertain everybody else? Look at like Burning Man, which is, how many people have been to Burning Man? A couple. Okay,
I'll be there
this year.
My first
Cool.
time, yeah.
So if you look at Burning Man, right, it's not an economy, but it's a kind of a macroeconomic experience, and there's no spectators. The famous two-word statement about Burning Man, fantastic. I went there first in '99, and there was just this big. I have absolutely no idea what it was. My friend just drove me out there, and we got there at 2:30 in the morning, and it's dark in the desert. We drive across the desert. I've never driven across white sand desert, and we come to these burning, trash barrels, and there's just this huge plywood entrance because you used to drive through actually a plywood gate, and it just says no spectators over the gate. You're going in, and you're just like, what does that mean? But the idea there is like you're the entertainment, like whatever it is out here. There's no bands planned. We don't. There's not like a big event. It is you that are to entertain each other. And when I think about virtual worlds, right, like if we do enter this era of abundance, which I profoundly believe we will, then it seems like a lot of our economic energy and our intellectual energy will shift to just sort of, like how different or our delightful our lives can become. There's a real evidence of this in Second Life, which I found really fascinating, which is that the traditional kind of marketing view of the world, right, is that people are highly homogenous, and we do seek to be like each other. We seek safety, and we seek safety through duplication and through following each other's leads, and we are herd animals. If I look over here, everybody will kind of tend to look over here in the room. We're not lions, but nevertheless, one of the things we saw in the early days of Second Life was that people were incredibly iconic and eclectic in their behavior and in their clothing and in their building. Second Life was, even though there was a certain wanting to live in Malibu kind of an aesthetic to Second Life in some ways, that was only an average over a ton of locations. If you actually looked at Second Life, you saw the craziest stuff like Burning Man. And so what I think that speaks to is the idea that we are interested in more and more diversity and more options, Like, I think that if we could all design our own, I guess what I'm saying is, if we could all almost effortlessly design our own clothing, or if we had access to, way more options than we have right now, we'd actually all look more different from each other, not more alike. Marketers would have us believe that we'd all buy, Dolce & Gabbana or something, but I believe that just isn't true. Second Life just speaks against that. We would in fact look at each other and be like, how can I be a little different? Okay, Peter's got the blue going. I'm gonna go somewhere else. And I think that we're actually going to do that. And so I think writ large, as we go into these virtual worlds, we're going to actually go more and more in the direction of diversity and eclecticism and iconic behavior. And I bet that'll influence our economies as well. We'll go that way.
So I think about the idea that a friend of mine, Eric Hirschberg, is the CEO of Activision. One of the top video game design companies. I keep on saying, stop having your employees design virtual worlds for your game. Have your gamers design your game. So I imagine that in the end result, imagine if people could be an explorer and just going on an epic adventure. I go on an epic adventure that you happen to have designed last week.
Yeah, totally.
And so we can go into the rabbit hole as deep as we want. And maybe that's where we spend our time. Maybe the artistry is the creation of worlds, and the occupation is the exploration of those worlds.
Yeah, or playing different roles within them. I used to imagine if you got everything down to the point where it was perfect, how cool would it be to live in a samurai village from the 1600s? And get a booklet, that kind of tells you what the rules of engagement are. So you can just live there for a week.
You can live anywhere, any time of history you want.
Yeah, but it's flawless.
Ancient Greece.
It's absolutely flawless.
Right.
The visual and the sensual experience is perfect.
So, let me ask a question to the group here. we spend our time here, but if I could create a universe, a samurai village, a Platonic village in ancient Greece, a made-up European village on Europa that you could go and live and explore and experience, that was rich and exciting, and I mean, could you imagine getting lost there and wanting to spend time and explore and learn and create?
Yeah.
I mean, so could that offset, in a world where that is effectively free or micro, would that offset your desire to have to work, right? I mean, that's an interesting, I'm playing the question in my mind constantly of where are we going when we don't have jobs? How are we occupying our time? Like reading all day.
You
right?
know,
True, right, where your imagination is. But even one step further, because it's infinitely variable, because it's based on your interaction.
You know, it's funny. It's like Kasparov losing to the chess machine. I mean, and for the people in this group, there's one of those like, don't put this on the transcript. We'll all just talk about this for a second. Yeah, I did this tweet. I just do crazy stuff. And a while back, I don't know what moved me to say it, but I wrote this tweet where I said, how are we as a species going to collectively deal with our own irrelevance? So I wrote that and I thought, I don't think most people understand that and certainly don't like it. But, you know, it's like if we're not the best at building cars in the whole world, if some wonderful artificial intelligence or sentient intelligence that we build is, you can think about just, it kind of relates to what you're saying, right? Like if we literally are never going to run the fastest mile again or build the biggest skyscraper or the fastest spaceship, what are we going to do?
We're transient.
Maybe we're just going to hang out and entertain each other, you know?
So I have one last question for Philip, then I'm going to turn over to the group here. Do you imagine, Philip, in N years, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that enough computational power and enough AI will enable you to enter a virtual world that is indistinguishable from the world that we currently feel and see? 100 years from now.
Oh, for sure, yeah, 100 years for sure.
Okay, so 100 years from now, you could imagine that one could enter a world and call it what's the movie, guys? With Keanu, the Matrix. So we're enter the Matrix, where you cannot distinguish between that.
Yeah, well, sure.
Okay, sure. So if that's the case, one could imagine that in that world, I could create a virtual world where my people can't distinguish that they're in a virtual world.
Yeah.
So if I believe that, then I have to ask the question, which I've answered for myself, do I believe that we're living in a virtual world today?
Yeah.
And my answer is absolutely yes. I think we're living in a virtual world today. What do you think?
Or it doesn't even matter, right? The fun thing. Okay, so here's a thing that this group.
Because when I ask the question, are we the first physical manifestation of an intelligence ending up in a virtual world? If we're the first, fine. But if we're not the first, then we're the nth, and we're ultimately living in a virtual world.
Okay, so I'll tell you the coolest thing ever about this, and everybody here will get it in a way that most people wouldn't. But
which makes asteroid mining so much easier for me. I just have to hack the code.
Exactly. You don't need to fly to these things. I just got to get in I got to get the command line. Here's the deal. This is really fascinating. When I first started working on Second Life, so my background's in physics, and I just love physics, and I love it at a conceptual level. And so I just always love this question, kind of how the world works. So here's this really interesting thing. So imagine that you have two objects, and they're going to collide with each other in a virtual world. Two balls are going to run into each other, two ping pong balls. Now, okay, here's the deal. You can think about this quickly. It's an interesting little computer problem. Now, if you discretize, so if you have slices of time on your computer, then the little balls have to move they don't move like this, right? They move like this. So they move discretely. They have a well-determined velocity, but they step through space a certain distance each time they run into each other. Now, when they run into each other, you might have this situation where if they're moving quite fast, they might almost get on the other side of each other in that step so that they wouldn't run into each other at all. They'd sort of miss each other. They'd go right through each other. Now, it turns out in physics, when you get down to like simulating the laws of physics like we did in Second Life, this sort of stuff happens all the time. If you push against a wall really hard, you'll just pop through it, especially if the computer slows down a tiny bit. In fact, people would exploit this in Second Life. So like I can kind of push against the door to your room, and then my buddy can like set off a big bomb, and this slows down the simulator just enough that the force I'm putting on the wall puts me through to the other side, and I pop through to the other side. Now, you might think that this is an easy problem to solve. You might sit out there and think, oh, but I know, surely, Philip, I know the velocity of the two balls, and I know where they've been before. But wait a minute. Consider that it's a whole bunch of balls coming together at the same space, right? Not just two, but a whole bunch, right? Now, in this case, I need to then sort of remember where the balls were both before and where I'm predicting they're going to be next. And so what happens is, in computational term, this becomes a kind of an n-squared problem. It becomes an uncomputable problem to figure out what's going to happen in this world. You guys know where I'm going with this, right? So then you might ask the question, So it's fundamentally impossible to create a virtual world which doesn't have some trade-off between pushing things through walls and using too much computing time. So then you might think to yourself, if Peter's right, and we are being run on somebody's old computer, then you could ask the question, well, perhaps it too has a discrete or quantized, dare I use that word, way of computing things. And in fact, if you push objects on each other, might you see in the real world that sometimes those things just absolutely move through each other? And of course, for everybody in the audience, right, this is the kicker. That's called quantum tunneling, and we do in fact see it. Now, the laws that suggest the laws that look at quantum mechanical properties, like two things tunneling through each other, are a bit different in their scale, and there's lots of people who have written about this who will come out and say, but wait a minute, that doesn't mean we're a computer simulation, and I think that's fair. But it is interesting to observe that actually there are many aspects of physical law that appear to be sort of derivable from computational limits, which is really a weird thought. So
with that, let's open it up for questions here.
That's cool.
Please. If you don't mind, just so Philip can see the diversity of where you're from, your name and where you're from would be great.
I'm Victoria from Uruguay, and, well, really interesting talk. I think that the difference between, the virtual reality and the normal reality is that actually in the virtual world, there is a human creator. So I feel like, I don't know if you or your team can see everything, and so you can do lots of studies on human behavior, and especially market research. I mean, you can do lots of stuff that right now in the world you can't, because there is no one like up.
Yep.
So what are you going to do with that information? Can you sell it and do a business out of it?
No, we're going to take away the creator. That's such a great question. So in the virtual world, there's a real creator. I fundamentally believe, and we took steps toward this in Second Life, and we will do it the right way in high fidelity. It's going to be cool. I believe that you cannot have a real world in almost a Pinocchio sense without it being, I'm not just going to say like open source, but I'm going to say without it being decentralized in a deep way. The internet today is not that way. I mean, I guess, there's Google or whatever, but the internet today is fundamentally decentralized in the sense that you can kind of find a web server where you truly are alone. So the same, I believe, will be true with the real virtual worlds that come to dominate human experience. I think that'll totally be true. You cannot possibly have, I used to always say at work, you have to design for no off switch. Like if the government comes in and says, shut it off, you have to say, hey man, we designed it so that it can't be shut off. Like it can't be real unless it can't be turned off, or otherwise some dummy will turn it off, as happens at nuclear power plants and stuff. I mean, it never works. It's a great question.
Please, down here.
I'm Massimiliano from Italy. So what is your vision for education and high fidelity, and have you been thinking about doing something like SETI at home from Berkeley, and so harnessing this, wiretapping this computational power from every computer, and doing some actual science and experiments into the virtual world?
Yeah. Well, to take the second question first, yes, the SETI kind of idea is exactly what we're hoping we can come up with a way to do. But going back to education, I mean, I think that education in the virtual world is already pretty interesting. A lot of the really genuinely fascinating uses of Second Life have been around education. Role-playing, varying the context so that you're learning in an environment that's profoundly different and more memorable. allowing people to role play educational experiences they wouldn't be able to do. There was a great example in Second Life that I always love with the Canadian Border Patrol. There was a school in Canada that was teaching Border Patrol agents, and they just set up a totally amazing Border Patrol experience with cars and drivers and everything. And you had to get up there and do Border Patrol. And can you imagine what a good training experience that is? And the Border Patrol, obviously, you can't really, I mean, it's not quite like airline pilots, but you gotta be ready to go up there before you go up there. And so they were doing that. So I think virtual reality will profoundly change education. Maybe even more. Maybe the online stuff that we're seeing that's so powerful right now. Just with kind of basic online, sometimes didactic, but very kind of long tail coursework. Maybe that'll have a bigger impact. But I think virtual worlds, with their ability to add like the role playing experience and the community experience to it, will be really good.
Please take these two guys here.
Hi, I'm Hannu from Finland. So you kind of perhaps started answering this question earlier about who's the sort of god of virtual worlds, and wanted to know your opinion on sort of some of the other worlds besides Second Life where the god seems to be Gary Gygax. So why did we essentially why did sort of environments like World of Warcraft and sort of a lot of the other online games, sort of like EVE Online, where you can now sort of mine asteroids and play with spaceships,
Yeah.
why did these environments take off sort of perhaps more rapidly than Second Life did? What was sort of the compelling aspect of the sort of game experience?
I think because that's a great question. Dungeons and Dragons, it's like heroin. I mean, we're drawn to sex, and we're drawn to adventure, and we're drawn to killing dragons in a way that is really profound to the human nature. I mean, the first thing we want to do in every new medium is have sex and fight, and we do. And so I think that's what appropriately creates the correct creation myths around stuff. If you've read Snow Crash or Ready Player One now being fabulous, and if anybody hasn't read Ready Player One, read it. It's just fantastic. It's kind of a new Snow Crash. Yeah, we are drawn to these opportunities around finding people and intimacy and fighting, and it's always going to be a leader. But then I think that like Peter said, there were so many companies that tried to have the same scale that Second Life did in building virtual worlds that were built by the designers and not by the people. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, it is, and the same thing with dating, I suppose, it is fundamentally, I mean, once you've gotten through all the sort of foreplay, it is the actual kind of quality and complexity of the person you're engaging with that keeps you. And I think that's kind of also true with virtual worlds. If you just build, an infinitely extended series of small forests or small settlements interspersed with forests containing meaner and meaner monsters that you have to kill, built by designers, come on. I mean, everybody's got a 100-hour lifespan on that, and then they're going to stop,
I just wanted to, sorry, Adam from Canada. I wanted to explore a little bit more the issue of transportation, and in particular city planning and how these virtual worlds could affect that. So what you're seeing now is cities that are trying to plan, 20, 30 years in advance for their transportation systems and how they're going to move people around and investing billions of dollars in that. And I'm curious at what point do you see cities saying, we're not going to build anymore, we're just going to devote those resources to creating more authentic virtual worlds because that should ease the kind of congestion and some of these issues. Like, do you see that happening?
Yeah. Well, that brings up a lot of points, right? There's one of my favorite books when we started Second Life was Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of American Cities, which was a book about urban planning. And what she basically said, and she was regarded as a total infidel at the time, was that you shouldn't really do it. I mean, she basically said you shouldn't try and plan these cities because she said, look at New York, it's killing it. And it's really unplanned. It's highly driven by market forces, and you have all this overlapping. That the Diamond District is sitting right on top of a nice residential area, and she said that's why New York's good. So I think in general, market forces, transparency, and a lot of kind of Kickstarter activities will come to replace at least some of what we know as sort of central city planning today. I think some of that is driven by that transaction cost. I mean, my God, look at all these Kickstarters where people are able to do things that like governments did before. I mean, that's just, like the space telescope. I mean, it's just ridiculous what we can do today with a kind of almost a direct democracy or a direct market approach. But yeah, I don't know. Should those cities stop? I can't. I mean, I don't know what you think, Peter. I think the city's saying like we have a 30-year plan. I mean, I just want to laugh. I mean, I can't see 30 years out for cities. I mean, no idea. Please.
So what evidence, oh, sorry, Ilse from Colorado or Germany. What evidence do we have about how avatars behave as opposed to their real world people? And how does that affect what changes we might see going forward?
Well, I wouldn't say that we've all been avatars long enough for there to be what I would call real academic or kind of quantitative evidence around that. But there are a lot of anecdotal things that are quite interesting. One I was talking about earlier was that there were a group of adult autists. There were a group of people who were adults and were autistic who got into Second Life. Really cool guy who later came to work for us. He took this group of people and he stuck them in Second Life on an island, and he said, I want you guys to try interacting with each other in these kind of uncomfortable social situations and seeing how that feels as avatars. And then after doing that, I want you to wander off this island into the larger kind of public world of Second Life and see how you do. And they did this longitudinally over a couple years, and they looked back, and there was a generally very positive impact on that, because the virtual world provided a strong sense of presence, but not so strong the sense of presence, eye contact, demand for social cues, demand for facial expressions. It wasn't so strong that if you had autism, you weren't just, kind of cowering at how incapable you were of engaging in that manner. And so I think there's lots of good anecdotes that, by and large, being an avatar is an expansive experience. I could say other anecdotal tidbits, like people generally are the same gender as their avatar, which is consistent with this idea of strong projection, that you materially feel like you are your avatar. So it almost sort of simplifies the answers to the question.
Okay, well, I guess I'm wondering whether, for example, we feel more free to do things in virtual space than we do feel free to do them in the real world. So you said expansive. What implications might that have for, say, bad behaviors,
right,
or antisocial behaviors, or things that we don't dare do out here?
I don't think we know yet. I do know that people certainly were mean to each other in Second Life, profoundly so. However, I was surprised to see, for example, how much less people were the same people. And I wouldn't call it scientific studies of this, but I had many very personal examples of this as I was trying to manage this community. It was often the case that people would interact in our forums savagely with each other, brutally, in just very inappropriate and very oversimplified ways. And then I would always get them together in the world, virtually, and they'd, I was out of line there. And so I think there's a continuum where the greater a sense of presence there is between the individuals, the more feeling of responsibility there is. So what I suspect is, with high fidelity and with other systems where we're able to see each other's body language, and we're able to see each other's eyes, I bet I don't know if regress is a good word, but I bet we come back closer and closer to who we really are and how we really interact. That's my suspicion.
Go in the back over here. Do those two questions, yeah.
I am Mike from Greece. Philip, you're trying to create the ultimate virtual world, and sooner or later you or someone else will do it. That a world that could outcompete the real world, let's say. Right. If you were in the position of Neo at the very first scene of Matrix, what would be the color of the pill that you would choose? The red or
I'd
the
go
blue?
for it. I'd take the red pill, right? That was the in pill. For sure. I mean, because I think we, at least to some extent, will be carried along into these worlds, right? I mean, I think that we will get to be a part of them, or in fact, without choice, we will become a part of them. So, I don't know. I'm an optimist. I mean, I feel like most of these experiences are positive, disruptive and frightening. But if in the aggregate positive, then the choice seems pretty easy. I don't know. It's my best answer. I know it's a hard one, though.
Okay, Philip, thank you so much. Great ideas. And Roberto from Brazil. My question goes in line to what Adam raised in a different way. He thought about urban planning 30 years in the future, as I come from Brazil and thinking 30 years in the past, as we have a huge gap in terms of on infrastructure. So my question is, what could be learned from Second Life or the virtual world in order to enable us to improve our real world here? Not talking about Peter's hypothesis that's going to be real.
Well,
what can be learned from that, really?
Here's a really interesting thing. Second Life's got a $600 million GDP. It's had that for a while. That's a lot of money. But it's not very much money compared to like foreign exchange transactions, which are something like, they're really big. I don't know what they are, but all the electronic ones, it's like billions of dollars a day, I think, in Forex or something like that. The Linden dollar has had stability against the US dollar and the euro, despite us being this little private company that has gone through like huge, we screwed this up.
You don't fix it. You don't fix the transaction.
No, we don't fix the exchange rate. It floats using a market. We basically have a macroeconomic balance policy that it has a single individual making opportunistic trades in the public market to basically try to hold the exchange rate constant. But like the U.S., like any other real economy, it's totally not constant. So it moves against the dollar and against the yen and against the euro. And what we saw, here's the thing that's really just mind-bogglingly cool, which is that the Second Life Linden dollar fluctuates less against those world currencies, despite the incredibly sort of decentralized and rather uncontrolled and rather turbulent nature of the community itself. So one of the things I think we can learn is let go of the steering wheel with respect to some of these market forces. I mean, it is not likely to be the case that in a transparent, substantially open market, you're going to have these horrifying, disasters, say, in currency prices. It's more likely that well-intentioned or ill-intentioned, governmental or policy practices are the things that cause those problems. So I think it's one vote in the argument toward transparent, open systems generally being more stable. That's one thing that I think we see.
Education, anything that we could learn from there?
I don't know that the world of Second Life is big enough yet to make direct comparisons to the real world, but I think, again, that in general what I saw, so for example, people would get together and form entrepreneurial businesses with each other in Second Life with a remarkably low degree of awareness. I mean, the other person was an avatar. They didn't have a credit score. You didn't know what country they were from, but people still got together and formed businesses just fine. I think what it showed was that the ties that bind us together are a bit more inexplicable than what we, traditionally believe. We think that infrastructure safety is more salient in human interaction than it really is, I suspect.
Great. Let's go in the back here.
Hi, I'm Brad. I'm from San Diego and actually a fellow Triton.
No way. Cool.
Yeah,
that's my hometown.
My question was, I guess, do you see Second Life perhaps being a proving ground for artificial intelligence? So maybe like the thing after it passes the Turing test, can it pass the manipulating an avatar in such a way that it looks like a human to everyone else and all that? Or have you philosophized about NPCs and as AI and all that?
Yeah, I have. I think one of the most exciting things about high fidelity is that we're going to try to make it so that what kind of an agent or an entity you are is not known, which is just so thought-provoking, right? Like where will we pass over the point where you really can't tell? That famous idea of the Turing test is such a compelling one and can be tested in so many many ways, inside something like high fidelity. When does it become fun to do thing X with person Y, and at what point does that person Y not need to be a real person? I also think that, again, this is the big thinking that you guys do here at SU. If we do see, here's the thing, if we do see the rise of great, amazing, real intelligence in our lifetime here, and I certainly think we will, and I bet most people here think we will. I think, by the way, computational intelligence of various interesting forms is a lot easier than like expanding our own intelligence in our little brains in here, because this is hard stuff to get into and work with, but computers are pretty easy to work with. And so if there is if there are sort of intelligent things that rise as we have more and more computation at our hands, where are they going to live? They're totally going to live in the virtual world. They're totally going to live in there because their access to and ability to interact with that world will be much higher than it is here. I mean, you can have the AI walking around as robots here, but come on, that's still hard. That's a lot of energy, expensive. You can't teleport. I mean, if you were a AI, you're going to be like, screw this. I'm not rolling with the aluminum body. I mean, I'm going to hang out in
Schwarzenegger's getting old.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a question here. Yes.
Hello, Gülay from Istanbul. I mean, in real life, all these rules, like dress codes, you need to be in a certain way, and marriages, etc., etc. And then and people break all these rules secretly, and we call them bad people. And art, I mean, seriously question all those things. For example, we had a workshop here, and it was a drama workshop. I asked people go into the newborn creatures, and they just act the way that they want. And they really want interesting creatures, and they looked pretty happy. So how is these things in virtual world? I mean, you set the rules, or if you don't set any rules, does the crowd or society goes to chaos? Or like basically, do we really need these rules to keep society going?
Well, I mean, we certainly don't need all of them, right? I mean, some of these rules have lived on for a long time now and are probably past their prime. I do think that in the virtual world, for so far as I've seen it, I mean, for what I've seen so far, I do think that we establish cultural norms. But I think that kind of collective governance to enforce those norms around, who we marry or how we dress, is an artifact of fear. It's an artifact of control structures that are appropriately motivated by a more savage, time in human history. And I think that virtual worlds at least take away, happily, some of the risk and some of the fear we have of each other. And so naturally you see systems there which have more expressive freedom at a lower cost, basically, to society, right? And so I mean, that's what I've seen so far in Second Life, and that's what I think we're definitely going to see in virtual worlds. And for that matter, obviously, we're seeing it in the real world now, happily. We're also interconnected. One of the things that I think we see is that when you're profoundly interconnected in the virtual world, you don't break the rules, actually almost to a fault. People always ask me, this is random, people always ask me, what do you see in Second Life that surprised you, which I always think is the funniest question, because I'm like, come on. I built the thing. I mean, the whole point was to be really surprised. But one of the things that I was surprised by was conspiracy theory. This is really interesting. A question earlier about, this world is controlled by one God, and you people could be reading my, in fact, at Linden Lab, for example, this was to some extent at least possible, not probable, but possible. We could be looking at your transactions in Second Life, right? Because we had some of that stuff at least stored just to keep your balances. So what was really funny about Second Life was people were like all over this. I used to get these emails where people were like, I know that you've got it out for me, Philip. And I know that you made this following policy change because you don't like me. And why is that? And I would respond, I'd be like, at this point, there are 10 million people that have signed up for this thing. How can I have it out for just you specifically? How could I possibly be that smart to just have, got a little black book on everybody? So this idea of, how people are afraid of each other in a profoundly connected society, this is one that's going to affect the real world. Like the fascination we have with kind of conspiracy theories and fear, some of that actually, unfortunately, is going to go up as we live in a society with more transparency and more connection. Everybody's going to read into it a degree of agency above them that's not real, Is the FBI or the NSA, very topically, really like reading all your email, right? They're probably not, right? I mean, it may be vastly inappropriate for them to have access to it, but the reality is we have an expectation that they're reading, each of our email. That's almost certainly not true. And that was super fascinating in Second Life to see as a behavior.
Hi, I'm Vivian from Mexico. Going back to what you were saying about how people in this virtual world get entrepreneurs, like they get together without knowing anything about themselves. That means that they take like higher risks and they don't think like so much on the risks. Even though those people in the real world, they're still considering those risks and they're not applying the same knowledge necessarily in their actions. So if you're considering the virtual world as an educational tool, how can we measure the abilities these children or people are gaining in the game to transfer them to a real world?
I bet there will be a lot of really interesting ways to measure that. For example, the classic prisoner's dilemma, in which you engage people in a test in which, if they cooperate with each other, they both end up slightly better. But of course, it's classically known that this happens. This people's tendency to do this outcome, to go for the better collective outcome, is highly sensitive to their sense of reciprocity and dependence on each other. And so people do experiments like, if I make you both sort of feel some bond or kinship and then have you play the game, you're more likely to play collaboratively. I bet you that we'll be able to look at the results of immersion in virtual worlds by basically looking at real-world behavior that's consistent with that. And I'm almost certain what we'll find, which is that for better, I think, the virtual worlds will generally make people kind of more likely to trust each other. And this has already happened to a certain extent, right, with online networks. I think the very fact that look, think about how insane it is that we look at, like, I say it today, you guys won't even understand what I mean by insane, right? Like, I'm older. The idea that you present like a resume that's like a link to like a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page, I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, like the idea that you would just click through a couple of online links and essentially decide that you trust this person or that they really are a student or a doctor or whatever. But we do, and we do it because we just intuitively now, having felt the network for so long, we sort of know its truth. And I think that that's going to really have a profound impact on behavior as people are able to engage in more lifelike activities inside virtual worlds. They'll also carry the experience they have there, which I think is generally a more trusted and connected one, out to the real world. And hopefully that'll, if it applies to everybody, it'll benefit everybody, at least in the aggregate.
Over here, and then we'll go to the back.
Hi, Theodore from Bulgaria. Two questions, one technical and one non-technical. The killer for all kinds of real-time communications, including telepresence, is jitter. That's the variance of delay. How do we fix that? And then here we are taught of the idea of matching opportunity with the exponential growth of technology. So can you give us some advices on designing businesses for virtual worlds?
Well, let me answer the second one differently. The first one, jitter. Yeah, jitter is a really important thing. It's fascinating. It's a huge sort of neurophysiological phenomena where we're predicting the next few moments ahead of us. And if we see errors in that prediction, if what happens in the next few tens of milliseconds doesn't agree with what we expect to happen, we have a strong aversive or fearful reaction to that. And jitter, which is like in a video, if I take one video frame and on average I'm showing you 30 frames per second, but I move a bunch of the frames around, squashing some together and spreading some out, the experience to you is extremely jarring, even though I'm giving you the same aggregate amount of information over, say, 2 seconds. So yeah, jitter is an important thing to take care of. We're basically just trying to solve it by using networking techniques that are, sort of best efforts delivery and the lowest possible signal path, UDP based, all kinds of, very small parts loosely joined. And we're sort of just trusting in the internet to have a lower and lower level of jitter. Jitter is one of the key things that we've measured in our systems that made us bullish about building high fidelity today. Second thing you were saying about building businesses, I don't know. I mean, I think that, maybe I'm going to answer this question a little differently, but I think, Peter's had me up here before talking about this. I think that being willing to entrust teammates with a profound degree of transparency and sort of decentralized impact over each other, kind of regardless of role or geographic location, that's got to be a huge change agent for businesses in the future. It's one that, in my Coffee and Power work, we really explored a lot, and one that I think companies are going to start adapting.
Coffee and Power.
Yeah, we do this thing in Coffee and Power and with our work list. We do this crazy thing where it's absolutely wonderful in our company, where every quarter we do this at High Fidelity. Now we just did it. every quarter we take not only everybody that's full-time, but we take the people that are participating in this thing we built called the work list, which is, as you can imagine, a kind of a virtual reality environment for doing software development that engages you with us in a way that's more intimate than like Elance, than sort of, contract outsourcing. We basically take everybody that's done work on our project and we give them all an equal number of stock options to distribute however they want anonymously over a 24-hour period, in other words, quickly, without a lot of thought, to everybody else on the team other than themselves. And then we add all those numbers up, and that's our stock option plan. That's what you get.
Isn't that great?
And you'd think, oh my God, turns out that works absolutely perfectly. Because it's a classic crowdsourcing exercise. It's absolutely classic. The only thing you can collectively agree upon is the right thing, which is how much everybody's really worth.
So it's
and the crowd is incredibly wise.
It's a great example of, again, how an exponential organization might think and act versus a linear organization, which is top-down.
Yeah, like the assumption that 6 people at the top of an organization can decide what raises and stock options 600 people should get, it's just totally nuts. I mean, it's just it's better than giving them random numbers, but it's certainly nowhere near as good as what I just described. Because in that process, you have no fighting, you have no fear of managers. Managers can take on a mentoring role because managers like, hey man, I didn't give you a raise, not my problem. Everybody else did. The people spoke, and the other thing, I hate to go on about this, but it's one of my favorite topics because I love this cultural change stuff, and it's been such an inspiration for me in terms of running my own company. Imagine how incredibly killer it feels in a 50-person organization to be number 1 in that outcome. How much better is that than having the CEO say, Peter, I just want you to know you're our top man. I mean, Peter's like, okay, the guy really likes me. He wants to sleep with me or something. But to have the results come out in the ranking and see that listing of where everybody decided how many of those 1,000 shares to give you and you were number 1. Think like, how awesome is that? We have little badges we do this crazy thing. We have these lab coats at High Fidelity, and we have these little badges like a fighter pilot badges, and we have these lab coats with our names on them because we're crazy that way. And we put these little badges under your lab coat that are like little things, which are when you're in like the top 3. Pretty cool.
Ever been up there? Never mind. Okay. Let's go way back.
Thanks. Hunter Clark from San Francisco. So when we see the Internet of Things and wearable technology kind of on the rise, how, if at all, do you in the next 10 years see that, especially, like Google's self-driving car, the glass, how do you see those technologies overlapping at all with what you're trying to build?
Gosh, I don't know. That's a great question. I really don't know. I think that the Internet of Things is unavoidable, right? Because the connection cost to put things on the Internet is just dropping to zero. God, what does that mean to virtual reality? Well, Peter was asking me earlier about, are we just going to digitize everything? And I think that's a really thought-provoking question. I don't think I've thought about it enough.
So if I could, just for sharing with you, the Google self-driving car. Have you driven in one yet?
I have. I have a while back. I think Sebastian was here. I think it was here.
Yes, Sebastian came in. So I don't know if you know that, but that car has got a set of like 64 lasers rotating at 10 RPM, and it's generating 750 megabytes of data per second. Right? So it is basically scanning everything in the world. So imagine 10 million of those cars.
Yeah.
Scanning in high fidelity, let me just use that terminology, everything on the roads. Add to that SketchUp and the fact that we have 5 low Earth orbit, high resolution satellite constellations launching in the next couple years.
Is that true?
Yeah, like Skybox is
Are
one
they
of them.
going to get down to like a half a meter or something?
They'll get down to half a meter, which is actually 0.65 meters, which is the legal current resolution. But add to that a fleet, how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of drones at millimeter resolution.
Oh my God, the drones,
right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine feeding, the drones are coming. So you can imagine feeding reality into
I'll give you guys, we're growing the company, and if you want to come work with us, hit me up. One of the things that is really, some people here may have really thought about a lot, is one of the questions I've had, and I don't know the answer to it, is if we did what you just described, and we basically just replicated, we had a kind of a geostationary database spread across this enormous cloud, so we had basically no storage cost, and we just put everything that we got from those drones and satellites.
Now, when you sell it, what would you bid for the Empire State Building?
That is exactly the question. Peter's got it. The thing that I've thought is this, like
free market.
Yeah, like if
I own it?
if I create a free marketplace where basically, I guess, if I just sort of point my iPad at
now
this
I want to
room,
buy more stock.
I can see the digital equivalent of this room. And the question I'm always struck by is, what are people going to pay for the opportunity to put things in that space? And what will those things be? And given that power law behavior and network effects will certainly mean that there's only going to be one of those kind of worlds that you put this content in, it means that there's going to be a really potent kind of an auction process or a debate, a market debate over what that content is. But I've just been so wondering, like, if I could go in like the Gap and I was a competitor and I could build a huge, don't buy this, buy mine across the street as like virtual 3D objects or something in that space, and Gap couldn't, if they couldn't outbid the person, would they get outbid? Like would the Gap be able to claim that this was manifest destiny or whatever, and they own this space because they own the real space? I mean, man, that is like so interesting.
And do you, if you actually own the Empire State Building, do you own the image of the Empire State Building?
Yeah.
And if you don't, then I could claim it there.
I think we really need to understand that when we think about what's happening next, and I don't think I understand it yet. I think that one's like at the edge of my conceptual grasp on why would we do that, and what will we put there? What will we put on the walls of SU?
So I'm talking to the Philip watching this video 5 years from now. This is your next $1 trillion opportunity.
Maybe. Wouldn't that be amazing? Is that true? Cool.
Okay. Right here, please.
Hello. I'm Cynthia from Mexico. What is the concept of aging in Second Life? Are people aging? Are people having different, do they have the same age that they actually have in reality? And I had another second question, which is, you as the creator of Second Life, how much part of your life do you spend there?
The answer to the first one is one word: no. Would you? And I think it's fascinating. But what age do we all want to be? I don't know. I've never seen a study on the apparent visual age of an avatar in Second Life. I would think that would be thought-provoking. It certainly wouldn't be 60, but I don't know that it would be 20 either. I think that would actually tell us something about human culture to do that across different groups. How much time do I spend there? I used to spend a ton of time there. I don't spend any time there now. I haven't for a long time. I do. I mean, I go there sometimes. I was there like a month ago at a Burning Man, the Second Life Burning Man kind of simulation that goes on in Second Life. Super cool. And I was sitting in the creation of that. I was just staggering. It was so cool. I was having a talk like this with about the same size group, and it was really neat. But honestly, I don't go there. It's funny. I'm actually a little bit. I guess I'm a little bit like, I don't know, shy is not the right word, but I'm kind of an inventor, like I kind of want to be working on things, and then I sporadically want to go out and be very kind of intimate and intense with people, and then I kind of want to work on things again. So it doesn't, at least for me, it doesn't fit the like, a lot of people in Second Life are just so on there, like they're so socially engaged with it, they're just able to be on there. Like I said, the average period of use is about 4 hours. The average session time is about 4 hours. But as I said, not everybody goes on every day, so it averages out to more like an hour a day.
All right. Yes, it's good in the back here, and we're going to be wrapping up. What's your out time?
What's my out time?
You're able to stick around for?
I don't know. I can hang around a little bit after this. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, it's Ahmed from Egypt, and I'm building on this question. You're building a virtual reality, and what do you think are the consequences of being immersed into a virtual world? How does that impact our human values and our social fabric?
Yep, I think we become more tolerant of diversity, for sure. There's no question about that. I mean, that's not even an anecdote. I mean, people come up to me and I'm like, oh my God, I met this guy from Japan. He wasn't that different from me. And, it's just over and over again. It's just amazing, amazing positive experience that people are able to have there. I think that, like I said, a little more trust in a chaotic system. Like it lets you, I think, who was saying earlier the idea that I think it was somebody earlier, if you can test like having relationships with people with a little less risk, that's great because you're able to lower your inhibitions, lower your fear a little bit, try some new things out. And I think that experience is just generally a good one and leaves people a bit more diverse.
But don't you think that it makes us a little bit more isolated and less human?
Well, I think it makes us less human in the sense that our peripheral nerves are not as connected. I can't touch Peter in the virtual world, and touching is very powerful. It's a very powerful form of communication. So I think that today, in Second Life, you don't have all of your nerves stimulated when you get close to somebody. But that's the thing where I said before, that game is going to be lost. or won to our benefit. I mean, there is no question but that we're going to expand the pathway between people. And Peter was saying earlier, is the virtual world, very quickly the virtual world is going to get more rich from a kind of an atomic granular level than the real world, in my opinion. All the stuff that matters, the virtual world is going to be better. I'm not saying that we're necessarily anytime soon going to have virtual worlds with sort of more atoms in them than the real, but they're going to look like they do. But the interface experience between us and that world, feel the wind on my face, run my hands through the leaves of the tree, that's a little bit harder. That's why I paused. But certainly that's not going to be 100 years. That's going to be more like 20 years. But I think in 7 or 8 years, we'll have virtual worlds that are just like completely, utterly mind-boggling to us as humans in terms of the actual quality of the visual experience. But it's fair. We're not there yet with the interface.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call it quits, go to some beer and wine. Yeah. A round of applause for the amazing Philip Rosedale.
Thank you.